Good morning. Hold on one second here. I'm just going to I need to bring something up. Let's see here. Right here, comments. All right. So this is new technology for me. I've never used this before. I'm excited for y'all to be here. I'm excited to be here with y'all. So if you can hear me, go ahead and comment just so I know that people can hear me. Again, this is new technology. I've never done this before. So let me see. I'm just trying to see if I can see comments. That way, ideally, I could answer questions if I can and stuff like that. All right. Good morning. All right, cool. So it sounds like you can hear me. If that's correct, just go ahead and say hi and we'll get started here. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Anna, if you can't hear anything, try your volume. It sounds like others can hear me. I'll wait a few seconds here, make sure that you can hear me as well. So I apologize if you hear stuff in the background. Those are my kids, maybe my dog. So if my dog starts barking, or my kids, I'll stop for just a second and let them get out of the room or whatever they're going to do. But give me just a second. All right. If you don't mind, would you mind just giving me some idea of why y'all are here? So I did ask that question, and it sounded like some ADHD. Do we have any pandas here? Any autism, OCD? What all brought you into this group, and what do you all want to hear more about? So part of this, I'll go through the presentation, and at the end, I'm just going to sit around and give you the opportunity to ask as many questions as you want, and I'll answer all of them. And then when we're all done, then we'll be done. But just let me know why you're here. And you still can't hear me, huh? Let's see. Everybody else can hear me, right? It seems like all of you have said hi, and maybe close out and then come back in. There may be a volume issue there. Okay, so it sounds like everybody else can hear me. So it must be just like the volume on your settings or something. So make sure you turn it up all the way. Well, if you can't hear me, you don't know what I'm saying. So I don't have the opportunity to type into the comments. There we go. Okay, 5-year-old, pretty certain ADHD. Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, so a lot of ADHD is what I've seen has brought people to this group. All right, go ahead and follow Amy's instruction. Well, she can't hear me, so it doesn't really matter. All right, I'm going to get started here. All right, a little bit about myself. So my wife and I both chiropractors in the practice, so we both see people. But my focus is on neurodevelopmental kiddos. And so my continuing education has been in that because, I'll be honest with you, when I was becoming a chiropractor, I never thought I'd see kids, and it wasn't until I had my own kiddo, and then I realized that I needed to know more. Right, I was seeing a lot of motor vehicle accidents and stuff like that, and it drove me into trying to understand more what was going on with these kiddos. And I was homeschooled, so I wasn't around a lot of kids, and wasn't familiar with ADHD when I was going through it. I wasn't even introduced to it until I was like maybe a senior in college. When I was studying, I had a physics exam, and one of my friends offered me Ritalin to help me focus, and I had no idea what it was. And so I was like, what is this? He's like, it helps you concentrate. And I was like, there's a medication for this? He's like, yeah. And I was like, I didn't know this. And so anyways, going forward, I had no idea that this was an issue, in high school and stuff, because being homeschooled, I had my kiddo, and my wife has always had a strong passion for pediatric care. And so she started seeing them, and she had this little girl whose testimony I'm going to put in. Uh, I'll share with you after this presentation if you want to watch it there. And this little girl had emotional dysregulation issues. So outburst, could not control herself, was angry, got kicked out of, I think it was 3 preschools. And the last one she got kicked out of it because she pushed this kid off of a jungle gym. And so the mom brings her in, and we started seeing this changes. Like, I wasn't taking care of her. I just saw the changes, and it blew my mind what was going on with this girl. And so then I was like, well, this is really cool. And so I started diving deeper into this. And this is what has brought me to this. So I've been doing this for several years now, and I love serving these kiddos because the things that you see, the changes you see are just amazing. And so I love to see that. And you can really, truly change the trajectory of these kiddos' lives when you just understand them. And so this past year, I've been working on neurodevelopmental stuff. And so you see up there, Focus 1. I'm going to take Focus 2. I think I'll be the only Focus certified practitioner in Dallas. There's a couple down in Austin that I know will be there, but in Dallas. And Focus is really developing on understanding neurodevelopmentally what's going on with these kiddos. And so it has been absolutely eye-opening and understanding where they are in their development, where they're maybe stuck, what needs to happen next. And so I'm excited to just continue on with that education. So I see ADHD, signs of ADHD, lots of aggression. Yeah, so aggression is a big one. That is going to be a perfect thing to talk about at the end. I'll talk about this. I'll lay the foundation of what's going on, and then we can talk a little bit more about that. But I'll get into that. All right, let's go forward. All right, so this is a cool little story. This little girl is a nonverbal in autism diagnosis. Struggle to focus, anxious, sleeping issues, just emotional control issues. And so after she started with care, she started to attempt to communicate and started communicating with some single words and some double words. And so it's just kind of cool. Like, these kiddos, they're just stuck a lot of times. They're just stuck in an area, and they need just help getting over something, just whatever roadblock is in the way. And once you can remove that roadblock, you can see some really awesome changes. Let me step back just for a second. On the bottom there, you'll see salutogenic. So I follow what's called a salutogenic model, meaning there are kind of 2 thoughts to health. One is disease-oriented, where you're focused on diagnosis of a disease, the disease itself. What are the criteria for that? In our office, we're not focused on the diagnosis, right? Every kid I see, the diagnosis is important only because it's important to you, right? I just see a kid who's stuck, who needs help with functioning organically and naturally, and that's my focus. And so in the end, whether a kiddo has a diagnosis or doesn't have a diagnosis, it doesn't matter to me, because my goal is to remove the roadblocks that are hindering their development and give them the opportunity to thrive organically. And so in our office, we focus on health. We don't focus on the diagnosis. So, whether your kid has a diagnosis or not doesn't inherently matter to me, because I see all these amazing kiddos, and I honestly, I don't try to remember their diagnosis, because I'm intentional about just understanding who they are and what they're going through in that moment. And the diagnosis is just a name to some symptoms. And so my focus is really just getting them better and healthy. All right. So here are some resources. If you all want, you're welcome to take a screenshot if you want. The thing, if you're going to pick any of these books to help you better understand your kiddo, I would start with Disconnected Kids up there on the upper left. It's by Dr. Robert Melillo, and he is a chiropractor. I think he's in New York. And he kind of was at the beginning of this all in helping, just understand what's going on with these kiddos, why this is happening, what's going on in their brains, what are the things that we need to be looking at. And so if you're going to start with a book, that is a fantastic book. If you wanted to have other reading sources, just let me know. I'm happy to put some Amazon links in for you all. But that's the book I would start with. It's a very easy read. and it really kind of helps you with a foundational understanding of what's going on with kids. That's my dog. Sorry, hold on a second. And so the next one I would go with is Healing the New Childhood Epidemics. That is another fantastic book. Both of those are great reads. If you haven't read them, again, start with Disconnected Kids, and we'll go from there. Let me get my dog real quick. All right, I'm back. All right. Here we go. All right, so this story, this is the son of one of my mentors, and he's got a neat story. I like his story for two reasons. One is my friend. I'll send you. You're gonna get some email from me after this talk, and you'll get a couple emails with me from resources and everything. Don't worry about it. I'll get you the resources that you need though. So this little guy he's got a neat story in the sense that, so him and his dad, his mom, they decided they're going to go on this long trip. The family was going to go on this long trip. And you can see him right there, just a cute little kid, smiley, happy, bubbly. And during the trip, this is an extended trip, it's like he flipped a switch. And he flipped a switch, and he was almost the complete opposite of what he was. He had emotional dysregulation issues. He was just struggling overall. So for some of you, this may sound familiar. I don't know. I asked if there was any pandas in here, but they ended up they're trying to figure out, so they ended up, stopping the trip early on, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with him. And, the greatest resource of knowledge, in my opinion, is you moms, because you moms have either gone through it all or know a mom who's gone through it, and you're just a wealth of information. And so he ended up finding out from one of his patients that she's like, this sounds like pandas. And so they ended up going through all the testing, and it's what happened. So he got an infection, and it completely flipped his system, his body. And so he went from this happy, smiley, just loving kid, hugs and everything, to just a lot of dysregulation, emotional, and you can see on the bottom right, he'd pull in on himself, meaning like he didn't want to be around all the noise and stuff, and so he put himself in a box, and it was essentially just hiding from the world. And so, this is my friend, and he's a chiropractor, and they eat organic, and they do all this stuff, and so you're like, well, why does this happen? And it was a random infection that he got, and they don't know where he officially got it from, but it just happened to him. And so it kind of set them on this course of also helping others with this. And thankfully now, a little while or a couple years later, he is 90% better. They've been able to, he's has an emotional control now outside of a lot of stress. He's just a different kid. So he went through this whole thing. And the thing I love most about this story is it's a little bit of hope, right? Like, there wasn't anything that would make you think this might be the kiddo who would have this happen to him, right? Organic eating, and I apologize for my phone, chiropractic care, all this stuff. And then this infection just flipped the switch on him. And they've been able to do all this stuff. They, still chiropractic care, but still they changed his diet, and they did all this stuff, and they moved eventually just to get rid of some of the air toxins. And his dad said he's flourishing. But the thing I love, again, is just the opportunity that there's hope, right? Like, just because something happened unexpectedly, there is still hope. And so I hope that my number one goal for this is for you all to understand your kiddos better. I want you to understand what's going on with them, what they're going through, and then ultimately to give you hope, because these kiddos' lives can be changed dramatically if we just understand what's going on with them and how to help them. All right, so what's going on? So I want to know from your perspective, what do you think is going on? Why are we seeing these numbers increase? What have you heard, read? Comment for me and let me know, why do you think this is all going on? Why in 1970 was it 1 in 10,000 had autism, and now we're down? I'll show you a slide here coming up next. It says 1 in 50, but that's from 2014. I think as of right now it's 1 in 39. But let me know, why do you think this is happening? Have Have you read anything? Do you have any thoughts on this? I want your thoughts on this. What do you think is going on? Why might this be happening? Why do we see this epidemic? Yes, food. Okay. All right, Kai. I'll answer that question. You have no idea. I'm going to help you with that. I'll give you nutrition, environmental issues. Yes. All right. So y'all hit it. So this from a genetic standpoint, this cannot be happening, right? Because from a genetic standpoint, you cannot have an epidemic like this. Genes do not change that much. So it must mean environment, what we're consuming, what we're eating, the stresses that we're under. So very good. Let me talk about that. So somebody commented, better testing and clear diagnostic criteria. So there was a study done in 2017 or 2018, and they wanted to know, is this because we just know more and we're better diagnosticians, or is there something else? And so what they do, I'll get into that, Connie. What they determined was that they could explain 50% of the new diagnosis through better, more awareness, better understanding, better diagnostics. The other 50% they could not explain at all, meaning there was no reason medically that they understood for this to be occurring. So we're seeing this rise, this massive rise, and they said, look, medically we cannot explain this. And so what they found is it's called what's called epigenetics, which means it's the study of the environment, what we eat, consume, do, our nutrition, and the influence it has on our genetics. So epigenetics is kind of a really neat thing to study, but they found traces of upwards of 14 generations back, meaning 14 generations back, their genetics, the impact, the stresses they had on their life impacts you today. That's pretty crazy. And when you think back on the past, 100 plus years, we had World War I, lots of stress, PTSD, chemical exposure. Then we went into a Great Depression. And then we had World War II and the PTSD and what they were all exposed to. Then we had Vietnam, Agent Orange. I have families that have come in and they can tie direct genetic changes through Agent Orange. Father was in the military. Genetic anomalies that can only be explained really through that. And so we have that. Then we have the Gulf War, and we have then we've had a 20-year war. So we've had a lot of stress, and then we compound that on with our food, right? So the environmental exposure of toxins and it's all impacting our genetic system. So let's see what else we got here. Yeah, all the chemicals we put in our food, absolutely. Excessive screen use, that is a very good one. I'll get into that a little bit more. There's a reason why kiddos like screen time, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but absolutely. So all that stuff. So the why, so what's, look at this number here. I mean, look at that. That's astronomical. There is no explanation from this from a genetic standpoint. So I think it was Connie said, look, you thought it was genetic. Absolutely, there's a genetic component to it, right? But the genetics are being influenced through the environment. And so what we know is that our genes, we do not have enough genes to explain all the diseases that we have. We just cannot explain it away. So there's not, in the 1950s when they were doing all the DNA and figuring that all the sequence out and everything, they thought they would find a magic gene that could explain this, right? If you had Parkinson's, they thought there'd be a gene for this and a gene for this. Well, we come to find out that the common housefly, the one that buzzes around, during your barbecue, right, annoys you and lands on your food, they have more genes than we do. We're far more complex than them. And so this isn't inherently a genetic problem. This is a stress, environment, and other things. And so absolutely, yeah, you're correct that there's a genetic component to it, yes, but it's stress over time. And so we have to start looking at this stuff to understand what's going on with them, why this is increasing, and then what we can do from our perspective. Now, the one thing I want you to take away from this, if it's not inherently genetic and it is environment, we have hope, right? That gives us power. Look, if we're not tied to, dad had hypertension, therefore I'm going to have hypertension Dad had diabetes, therefore I'm going to have it. We have power. This gives us the opportunity to make changes, because if we can make changes, we can change all of this, right? And so crazy cool stuff. All right. Psycho. Oh, that's cool. So I was just reading some of the comments. All right. So 6.4 million kids in the US have ADHD. So about 11%. That's quite high. One of the slides I don't have in here that I do have in another presentation is, so we're seeing the spike obviously in all of these, right? But a lot of these kids, about 2/3 of these kids with ADHD also have another diagnosis, another neurodevelopmental diagnosis, meaning they have ADHD and anxiety, or they have ADHD and OCD, whatever it may be. Of that 6.4, then a third of that 6.4 have, so that's about 2 million kids, have 3 diagnoses: ADHD, anxiety, OCD, whatever it may be. And then 12% of that 6.4, or any neurodevelopmental diagnosis, have 4 or more diagnoses. So there's a lot of overlapping ground here, okay? It's fairly rare for us to have a kiddo who just has one. We are thankful for that, right? But, when they have a lot, these kids have a lot going on. They're sharing a lot of common diagnosis with other people. And so, this telling us that this isn't a one thing. There's not one thing that we can point our finger to and say, this is the problem. We have an overlapping developmental issue. All right. So, I'll just check questions here real quick. Great understanding of the brain. Yeah, so good guess. We do have a better understanding of the brain and what's going on. And then we're understanding these kiddos better from that aspect. Absolutely. So kind of just to answer your question, for any diagnosis, they run you through some tests to get the diagnosis. So depending on what you're looking for, you need to find a provider that can do that for you. But we could talk a little bit more about that. Psychologist, yep. All right. So then 1 in 8 have an anxiety disorder. So 9 million kids. That is crazy to me. I grew up in Wisconsin, and I don't remember ever really being anxious. But all the kids that I'm seeing are just absolutely anxious. It is incredible. They don't sleep well. They're struggling with all this stuff. And so, out of curiosity, do any of you mind sharing? Do your kids struggle with anxiety? And if so, what have you found to be like triggers for this anxiety? Is it just overall anxiety? Is it, what's going on? Let me hear something. And let's hear what's going on. I want to know more about you all and how I can better address this. Do any of your kids have anxiety? So I have some kids that they're actually anxiety ridden, but they're the opposite of what you think, right? So they'll go to school and they're the perfect student. Like, they don't say a word. They are just absolutely, you're like, oh my gosh, this kid's perfect. And then they get home and then they're an absolute emotional wreck. Like they tied up all their anxiety during that entire classroom period, and then boom, they just let go. They can't handle any longer when they get home. And then so you have this teacher saying, oh my gosh, this your kiddo is amazing. They're perfect. They never make a peep. They do all their work, and then when you get home, and then they're yelling at you, right? Or they're just like, they pull in, or they're doing whatever. And it's just kind of interesting to see, because anxiety, everybody thinks that it has to be like demonstrative, like you see it, right? Like you see the anxiety in their face, but they can actually pull in too, and they can pull it in and kind of control it for a little bit, and then when they're in the right environment, they unleash, and they can become just emotionally troublesome to be around. And it's not their fault. They don't know that they're anxious. They're just pulling it in, and then this is all happening. All right, there's a lot of stuff coming in. I'm just going to keep going forward. I can't read them all, and I don't want to get too distracted. But so 32 million kiddos, or about 43%. I think this is old, because I just read something that 49% of kiddos have a chronic disease, chronic condition. So the numbers are increasing. Okay, so here's an interesting one. Being overly scheduled, overly overexposed, again, exposed to things that are not developmentally appropriate equals stress. Yeah, it does. Absolutely. I love that. Great comment. Sorry, I'm not going to try to get too distracted. All right, so does anybody know what, have you all heard of a canaries in the coal mine? Are you familiar with that? Is that a term maybe you've heard at some point in time? Comment if it is. I want to know if you all have heard of this before. Not that, it's going to change anything if you haven't. I'll explain it all, but just kind of curious. Some people have heard this, some have not. And so just kind of curious. I don't know how quick the turnaround is for me communicating to you, commenting. So um, this is something that I hear often is common. And I often hear about it from pediatricians. And so like they'll say like, like for instance, like I had a little girl come in and she didn't crawl. She didn't crawl well, and it was that's common. She'll grow out of it, and so I want to change this from it's not things that are common do not mean they're normal, right? And so to explain the canary in the coal mine, back in the day, the canaries were the warning signs to the miner, right? And so if the if the canary died, that meant that that the coal mine the miners were in trouble. The oxygen levels were changing in a negative direction. They could die if they don't get out. And so this is what's happening with our kids. They are if 43 or 49, I think it is 49% of them are already chronically sick. This is telling us something. But again, I hope, seeing that number is scary. But also if you step back and you realize that if genetics aren't anchoring us into into something and that we have power, that there's hope. And so there's lots of things that are common right now, but they're not normal. And so we need to start taking a look and identifying what is common and not normal to help our kiddos. About 30-second delay? Okay. All right. Mechanical systems. How do they work, right? You have this beautiful Audi here, right? It has a bunch of parts to it: door handles, doors, tires, rims. Also has a power source, right? So battery source. We'll give it a couple gasoline, right? All engine sort of thing, and then it also. But of those things, the parts and the power, right? You need information, right? So I always say, like, if you have this beautiful Audi, right, and you go in there and you want to listen to some tunes while you're on a road trip, right? You can have the parts, you can have the radio, you can have the power, right? Engines running, you know, there's power going to the radio. But if it doesn't have information, or if there's nothing coming to it, then you're not going to get tunes, right? You can't turn on the radio, you can't turn on your favorite station and have it work. I should change this out from a computer to a phone, right? But parts, power, and information. Look, if your phone can't receive phone calls, it's pretty much useless. Also, I mean, for the most part, what do we use cell phones now for, anyways? Text messaging and Facebook and other things. And so, I don't. My phone, if it wasn't receiving messages, if it wasn't, if I couldn't get on the internet, I'm not going to use my phone, right? And so, it these are important things because us as human beings, we're a living system. What do we need to work properly? We need parts, power, and information. Okay? So we have parts, right? Brain, spine, blood vessels, heart, lungs. We also have power, right? So the hierarchy of power would be the nervous system telling the heart to pump, right? The heart pumping and giving us oxygen. And then we have information. And so information is key. This is the big guy that we're going to start addressing. Because the way that we handle stress, interpret stress, understand our environment both externally and internally is based off of information. All right? So, look, anxiety. When you think about anxiety, right? When you have a fear of something, oftentimes the fear is of the unknown, right? Right? So that it's dark out and you can't see. It's not the dark that you're afraid of. It's what may be in that dark, right? So as a parent, when I get up in the middle of the night, what I'm most afraid of is stepping on a Lego, right? That's my fear, right? Because it's going to hurt. But for my kids, it may be something else, right? So anxiety is just not understanding the information and what's going on. I'll tell you one of the biggest reasons that kiddos actually have anxiety. So if you look at that brain in the red up there on your right-hand side, the far left side of that brain in the front, there's a thing called the cortex. And the cortex, prefrontal cortex, is what it does is it takes movement. So it takes in the information from our joints, our muscles, our tendons, all of that, and it predicts the next steps, right? So for instance, when you go in to grab let's say you want to grab a glass of orange juice or whatever from the refrigerator, your brain is already predicting this. It's already guessing, all right, that jug is halfway full. This is how much it's going to weigh. This is how much I need to anchor my arm, all of that stuff. Now, 80 to, I've heard anywhere from about 70 to 80% of kiddos with neurodevelopmental stuff have a poor motor control and poor body understanding. So meaning that the information that their prefrontal cortex is getting is not good. It's not correct information. And that can distort their prediction. So meaning a kid who's clumsy typically has anxiety because their brain is focused on movement is so important for life, right? It's what in reality 100 years ago, that's what you used to get away from danger, right? There was no, not everybody had cars or whatever. So you used, and you still use it today, but we use movement as a way to avoid things or get away from things, hide, climb, swim. What do we have to do? Well, if your brain cannot predict the next few steps, it naturally becomes anxious. So look, parts, power, and information. Kiddos, they have brains, they have hearts, they have lungs, they have parts. They also have the power. The brain is powering their body. The problem we're having is the information. All right, so because systems are made of parts, right? They're all designed to eventually. What do you think? If we're made of parts, what's going to eventually happen? Go ahead and comment. I'll give you a second. I know there's a delay, so I'll just kind of press forward because I don't want to keep you all here waiting for a long time. Things are going to break down. Okay? Sorry, there's a little delay on my end too, so I apologize. So things are going to break down. So, and it doesn't have to even be a part that breaks down. It can be a breakdown in communication. And so this is what we need to look at. So, look, when I was in, wear and tear, exactly. When I was in undergrad, my undergrad degree was I had 2 degrees, but cellular biology and chemistry. And so I was I was in a undergrad research facility. And we had these plants called the Arabidopsis. They kind of look somewhat similar to that plant right there. And we manipulated everything. So we manipulated the potassium levels, the calcium levels, and we had a gene. And we distorted the gene, and where we eliminated it, and then we made it faulty and all this other stuff. And we watched how it grew under different environments. And a lot of times, depending upon it all, it either grew correctly because of the correct environment, or it didn't grow at all, or it grew really weird. But what was important for this, in order to determine how this plant was going to grow, we needed to give it nutrients, but also like gravity and other things depended upon, or it forced how it was going to grow as well. So the plant gets information even from gravity and how it needs to grow and where it needs to grow. And when we distorted this all, we got some plants that looked really weird or looked very sick. It was an interesting thing. And so as a human being, right, what happens if we take away parts, power, information? Now, for the most part, all of us have the parts and the power, right? Unless there's some sort of genetic, like something was removed, or there's a genetic error and we have a loss of a part, but that's not what we're having here. We all have trouble with information. And so what do we have kids today? We have kids that are getting less light. So vitamin D, they just did a study, vitamin D was shown to, I think it was like a 30% larger, you were 30% more likely to have a kid diagnosed with neurodevelopmental or ADHD if you had low vitamin D levels. So we're not getting enough light. We do have polluted water. There's lots of medications in our water, so we're kind of reabsorbing this. Some of them are fat soluble, meaning they get into our fat cells and they can stay there for years. So it's messing with what's called our endocrine system, our hormonal system. And then we have poison in the soil. And this is because we talked about this environment, right? The pesticides and what that's doing to our system. And so let's kind of jump into that. The next slide. Oh, sorry, 2 slides. So look, our symptoms are really an expression of parts, power, and information. Okay, so you're in my health, right? But specifically in these kiddos with neurodevelopmental issues, these symptoms are an expression of something going on, right? Their environment, too much stress. And so we need to start putting these pieces together so that we can understand these individuals as a whole, because many of them have common symptoms. But I never view my kids as all the same, right? Just because one kiddo has ADHD, they're not the same. Jack and, Stu are 2 different kiddos with 2 different environments. And so each kid needs to be looked at differently. But look, these manifestations of symptoms are the result of some power, parts, or information problem. All right. Yep, this is the correct one. Okay, sorry. Neurodevelopmental quadrangle. All right, so really these neurodevelopmental disorders are a whole body disorder. That's what's going on here, okay? So it's not inherently one particular thing. It's kind of several different things. And this is this was developed by Dr. Paul Hardy, who's an MD. And so one of the things I want you to look at, look, what is at the very top of this? The nervous system, right? So I want to kind of hit this point home for a second here. When we look at these kids, we have to look at them as a hierarchy. What needs to be addressed first so that we can get a domino effect and ultimately impact them the most? All right, so if you look at this quadrangle, look, you have the brain at the top, you have the immune system, the GI system, and then you have the detoxification system. Many of what's really hot right now is that MTHFR gene, right? That's a detoxification gene. That's a methylation gene, okay? Or methylation process. Lots of people are looking down here, okay? So looking at the detox system. And then I get a lot of parents who are looking at the GI system and they say, all right, well, we need to put them on this diet, right? Because if we put them on this diet, then we've solved the problem, right? Well, I would probably say 80% of the kiddos I see have been on some sort of dietary change, right? And most of them have had minimal success. And the reason, I'll give you the reason why right here. Okay, so see how these arrows all communicate with each other? Look, our body is not interdependent. You don't have just a liver that functions by itself. You have a liver that functions with lymphatic system, with the endocrine system. You have lungs that interact with the cardiovascular system. There are parts to this, but they all act as a whole. I mean, that's so important for us to understand. Look, when we have a problem in a system, it can have a global, and oftentimes does, have a global impact. And so, look, you need to start at the brain. The brain controls what? Everything. It controls everything. And this is why when I have patients that come in, I tell them not to start with, we'll work our way through, but we're not going to start with the GI system. The GI system is vastly important and is very, very needed. Don't get me wrong. But the immune system, or the nervous system, is the thing that's going to have the greatest impact. And I'll tell you why here. So in the following slide, you're going to see the word sympathetic or hypersympathetic drive. So we have our brain has a system called the autonomic nervous system, okay? That is an internal sense. It is regulating blood pressure, heart rate. It's influencing the immune system, all of this stuff. So it's looking at what are we eating, what are the chemicals like in our body, what are the bacteria in our gut doing. It's looking at this, it's monitoring the system, okay? And then so it does one of two things. It goes into what's called fight or flight. You may have heard that like in high school biology, where the system is ramped up. It's ready to fight somebody or run. There's actually 3 parts to that. So you fight somebody, you run from somebody, or you stand still. Okay? And then there's the opposite, which is the parasympathetic, and that's the rest, relaxation, healing. It gives your body the ability to kind of shut down, take care of things so that you can keep going, right? So this is how we manage stress. Well, lots of kiddos, for multiple different reasons, are stuck in this what's called fight or flight or hypersympathetic drive. What happens with this? So with adults, what we commonly see, Crohn's, some other stuff. We'll see, high cortisol levels, so they'll start gaining weight. With kiddos, though, especially since they're still developing, one of the big things we see is like a leaky gut syndrome. So the brain is in this high stress mode. It's in this high drive, survival, fight, flight. Lots of hormonal stuff going on, right? That can be one of the main reasons they have anxiety or they have emotional dysregulation issues, right? If you imagine this, parents, this is the example I always give. Look, you're going into a test, but your teacher decided to play like heavy German metal music, right? And you don't understand any of the words. On top of that, you're trying to do math and it's just blaring all this music. It's like that's what it's like for the little brains sometimes. Like they're stuck in this like hyper drive of information because they're in this survival mode. Well, what happens over time though is we have these cells. Let me go this way. Our cells in our gut look like this. They're really tight. They're very, very, very tight. They're not supposed to let anything through. But guess what happens with long-term stress and environmental and fight or flight system? They start doing this. Okay, so they open up. So they open up. What do you think gets through when that happens? Well, we got an arrow that points to the immune system. So yeah, you better bet that, like those egg proteins that you're eating, well, they get through. And so what does the immune system look for when it's attacking a foreign entity? It looks for a protein. Well, that egg protein, that's foreign. That's not me. It shouldn't be where it is. It leaked through. And so you get like these allergies. You also get, bacteria and viruses that leak through this gut. And so you get these kids that are chronically sick and their gut is porous. But unless you correct the brain sending the information to the gut to tighten that stuff up, tighten that up, you're going to have a porous gut, a leaky gut. And so, then that impacts everything. It impacts the immune system. And then also impacts the detoxification system involved with the lymphatic system and other things. And so you can kind of see there's this hierarchy here. If we can correct the information from the brain to the organs, then we can have massive impact, affecting the GI system, the immune system, and then ultimately the detoxification system. If you that example I gave of my mentor's son, they've worked their way through the brain, gut, immune, and now they're in the detox center. And so he has, just changed immensely. And they're kind of at the bottom of it, right? Yep, the bottom of that. They're working on the detoxification system. All right, so Monica, I don't know what you said, but yeah, colitis, that all that stuff, inflammation of the gut, absolutely. All right, there may be a delay, so I'm not sure if that was meant just now or it's just coming through. I apologize. I hope you all are enjoying this, and this is super helpful for you. All right, so there's a trifecta to this, okay? So we're going to go over this. We've already talked about the genetic and environmentally induced predispositions. So meaning, look, we've had, generational stress, right? We know that moms and dads who are stressed, physically, chemically, and emotionally, high stress job, poor diet because of that. I'll give you the perfect example. We have a couple in the practice trying to get pregnant, and the male is a police officer. And so he is stressed out. That's a tough job. But you can also imagine with firefighters and other things and, other professions where there's a lot of stress. Either one of two things happens. Either they struggle to get pregnant or their kiddos kind of not inherit that stress, but the conception was in stress. And so there's this environmental stress on the genes. And so you're seeing this manifest itself out. And so this is, we have kiddos who are just going to be more likely to have this based off of environmental stresses. All right, and then so the microbiome. So that's the bacteria in your gut. And there are reasons why this is influenced, okay? And so you see C-section. C-sections are on the rise. Well, they're not on the rise, but they're fairly high in the United States. They're upwards of close to 40%, okay? And I understand there's reasons for C-sections. Don't get me wrong. Look, there are life-saving reasons for C-sections. The problem, though, that I have with C-sections, and they're starting to address this a little bit. I have two problems with them. One, from my aspect, as far as just from a muscle, nervous system aspect, this is a lot of strain on the neck, okay, to pull you out. It's a lot. I don't know if you've ever seen one or experienced one, but it's a lot, okay? So in my opinion, and I've seen some research, they're saying that about 90, actually I do have a slide coming up. I think it says 80, but I've also seen a slide or research that's showing about 90, 98, 99% of those kiddos have a sprain strain when they're born. Now, don't get me wrong, though. My wife and I, we had a birth at a birth center. My son had the cord wrapped around his neck. And he sat in that canal, and it felt like, I don't know, hours. He was probably in there for 20 minutes. I was trying to be calm. And then, I could see the midwife, checking his heart rate. I was like, oh my gosh. It's a nerve-wracking experience, right? But no matter what happens, that trauma to the head and neck. But with C-sections, my son still came out through the birth canal. With C-sections, they miss that bacteria. They don't get it. Thankfully, now they're starting to swab inside the mouths now with bacteria. But you want this kiddo to have mom's bacteria, right? They're in the same environment, right? They're going to encounter some of the same stresses that mom have. And so you want that bacteria because in the end, bacteria actually have a massive impact on our health. Most kiddos with ADHD, autism, and other stuff have lost the bacteria in the gut. And so this is an important thing. And this is related to GI stuff. But antibiotics. I get kiddos that come in. I had a 2-year-old who was, I think he was on 6 antibiotics by the age of 2. 6! Look, that's common, but it's not normal. Something's going on. Thankfully, we've avoided that since he started care. And so it's been awesome. But look, antibiotics are just destroying this. And this GI system, if you go back, right here, the GI system, look, points right to the brain. There's a direct connection. And we know that poor gut bacteria, poor flora, leads to, if you look over there to the right, neuroinflammation. Most of these kiddos with neurodevelopmental disorders have neuroinflammation at some point, whether it be GI or some other stuff. But there's inflammation. And so, look, we got to start addressing this. We have to figure out ways to keep our kids safe without putting them on antibiotics. Acetaminophen, so Tylenol, has been shown to increase the likelihood of ADHD. The reason I think they believe that is because it affects glutathione levels. So when you take acetaminophen, glutathione is a super powerful antioxidant and detoxer. And so you deplete it. So people, like adults who have been on it for long periods of time, they struggle to detox because it's leaching out, it's destroying that. If you want to know more about that, I can have Dr. Brittany give a talk on that stuff. She does a lot of the nutritional stuff, but yeah, so it depletes that. Inability to breastfeed. And so there's reasons for inability. Look, tongue ties, lip ties. I don't know if you all are familiar with that. Comment if you're familiar with lip ties or tongue ties. Did your kids ever have that? That's something that really common that we're finding. The reason for that is related to the MTHFR gene and some other stuff, but just interested in that. But when you can't breastfeed, you can't get. So one issue that we have with formula, and don't get me wrong, there's no judgment here, but if you are feeding formula, or they had formula, they didn't get the bacteria from you. So when you breastfeed, you're still giving them, bacteria. It's getting into their gut, and so that's part of the reason that we encourage all of our mothers to breastfeed as long as they can. Just because it helps feed their gut bacteria, which ultimately leads to lower neuroinflammation levels, better health, better brain development. All right, I already talked about that hypersympathetic response. So again, when you have that leaky gut, your kiddos are more likely, and this is why you'll see kiddos. So let me explain something to you, if to kind of connect the dots here. If a kiddo has, let's say they have an egg allergy, right? We have a little girl in the office who had this egg allergy. Started care, closed the gaps, no longer allergic to eggs. The reason she was allergic to eggs, or she had a response to the eggs, because the protein could leak through the gut, and the immune system responded like it should. It responded in an absolutely appropriate way. That's a foreign object. You need that immune response. But when we have this response that is not normal, oftentimes you have to look to the leaky gut syndrome, because that is where it's at. And that ultimately impacts neurodevelopmental stuff, right? Because we have to go brain, gut, immune system, and then work on the detox system, ultimately to help these kiddos. All right. Awesome. Thank you for that comment. So what's next? Where does health come from? All right. I'm going to skip over this slide for the most part. But look, our brain it takes 9 months to develop. It takes a while, right? It's already there. It's already, there's a nervous system at day 25, and it's collecting data from mom. And so, again, this is kind of an epigenetic thing, like where, baby senses mom's stress. There's actually, there's a primitive reflex called, I'm blanking on it, not the moral reflex, it's called the startle reflex. And what it does is, when mom's in a state of hyper stress, right? It actually, the baby stops moving, and they actually kind of go into this like protective state. It's a super cool thing. But that wouldn't happen if we didn't have a functioning nervous system. But again, just the baby is interpreting this all as they're developing. All right. So look, your nervous system, this is kind of just talking about the central nervous system, the brain, and then you have the spinal cord. They're essentially one and the same. They are the CNS, or the central nervous system. The spinal cord is just the tail of the brain. And so, fear paralysis. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you. All right. And then we have all these nerves that go in and out of the body. So, in the end, what I want just take away from this, look, the brain and the spinal cord are the most protected systems because they're the most vital system, right? Look, you can't get a spinal cord transplant. You can't get a brain transplant. You can get a heart transplant. You can get lung transplant. You can get, there's liver and other things. But there's a reason why this system is so protected. It is the relay center between your external and internal environments. And that's how we process. So remember that information. Look, we need to be constantly balancing external and internal environments. And that's all done through receiving information into the spinal cord, going up to the brain, and then sending information out. All right. So if I haven't hit this point home yet, I'm sorry. So what is the role of the nervous system? You see a sponge. It's a sponge. It is collecting data. It wants to know what's going on in the body, what the internal environment looks like, and what the external environment is like. Yes, this video will be on there. You're welcome to come back. Feel free. This is a lot of information. So if you do become overwhelmed, and you're like, okay, and don't get me wrong, we're all kind of stressed right now with everything that's going on, right? Take a moment, step back. You can jump on this later on, okay? All right. So please feel free to step away if you need to. It will be here. If you have a question, always ask, okay? All right, so it's a sponge. It's collecting data and information. And then it's responding to it. All right, I'm going to skip over that one and go on to this one. Sensory integration. Okay, so now we're getting into what is happening with your kiddos, okay? So this is how our brains and bodies work, and this is where the information is coming from. Okay, so we have sensory reception. The nerve gets information. It then goes up the spinal cord into the brain for processing and then integration. Okay, so this is a big one for kiddos with ADHD, anxiety, autism, sensory processing, and this is where the problem is, okay? Look, ADHD, when you look at it from a biological standpoint, there's no blood work, X-ray, MRI, testing. they're kind of working on some genetic markers maybe, but in the most part, there's nothing that they can point to, right? They just have to look at symptoms. Okay, so sensory, reception, processing, and integration. Look, your brain has to get good information in order for it to make good decisions, right? And if it doesn't, if it gets poor information, then you have a loss of integrity in what's going on. So if you look, okay, so you look at this little diagram here. You got the spinal cord. The spinal cord goes into the brainstem, then goes off to the left. There's the cerebellum, and then right above the top number 3, that's the midbrain. And then if you go up into kind of the cerebellum issue, okay, so information comes from the spinal cord, goes into the cerebellum, goes through the midbrain, which is involved with emotional stuff, and then goes up into the higher parts of the brain. Okay, so corrupt information. So if you have faulty information, like you're on a phone call, right? And it's all patchy, and you don't understand what's going on. Like even if it's whether or not it's an emergency situation or not, but imagine it's an emergency situation, and you're trying to get information to find your loved one or whatever. Look, if you don't have good information and you're stuck in that fight or flight, you're going to have an amped up system. So what we found is that kiddos, 70-80% of the kiddos have poor body awareness, meaning they're getting poor reception, which is leading to poor processing, which is leading to poor integration. Now, when you have poor integration, the cortex, so this part of the, let's see if I can figure it out on the camera, the front part right above the eyes, the prefrontal cortex right there, that is in control of executive function, meaning the things that allow us to do academic tasks, to put things in order, to follow a list of commands, whether written. So you have a kiddo who's getting poor information, poor reception, poor processing, poor integration. Okay, the prefrontal cortex, the thing that's going to say, okay, look at all those letters, look at that list, all right, I got to do this, this, and this, is not going to be working well. What is that? That's ADHD. That's also going to lead to anxiety because your peers are starting to do work, right? But you're trying to interpret this almost as if it's not in a different language, don't get me wrong. But because your brain cannot take it through that hierarchy of this is the list and this is how it's going to go, then it affects you, right? It gives you anxiety. You don't understand the next step. You're anxious because, your best friend Joe or Susie or whatever next to you is starting to do the homework, but you're still trying to process the world, okay? That also goes into working memory. And so, look, kids with ADHD and other things, they have poor working memory. Because they are struggling to interpret what's going on, because their sensory system is not functioning properly, then it also affects their working memory. The prefrontal cortex, which is involved with executive function, things needed to do to follow commands or to plan something out. Like, look, when I get home, I need to change clothes, grab a snack, grab my algebra book, and then study and do my homework because I have a quiz tomorrow. That's not functioning because of poor sensory input. You're going to have a breakdown. That's why you have the kiddo who comes home, maybe changes or doesn't change, and then ends up just playing video games because they've lost that. On top of that, that prefrontal cortex up here watches over the midbrain, okay? And that's the emotional center. They did a really cool study that showed that, so that midbrain, specifically the amygdala, don't worry about that name, but the midbrain, the amygdala, I'm going to use the word irritated. It was irritated in proportion to the kiddo's proprioception or body positioning. So meaning that a kiddo who had poor reception, poor processing, poor integration, the poorer that information was, the more that midbrain was activated and irritated, meaning poor body positioning awareness ultimately leads to emotional dysregulation issues. It amps that area up. And the prefrontal cortex is supposed to rule over that. So kind of logic over emotion. Well, this prefrontal cortex, because you have poor body positioning, goes down to, you see that number 3 right where cerebellum is? It goes down and monitors that area. Because ultimately, in the end, movement is about life and getting away, fighting or running, right? And so your brain puts a lot of importance on where you are and how you're moving in space. It needs it. It's ultimately one of the most important things that your brain is doing, is monitoring you through space. And that cerebellum is the area that fine-tunes information, okay? And also plays a role in emotional control. That's the area where if an officer were to pull you over and have you do like finger to nose and all that stuff, that's what they're looking at, okay? And so that information right there is, if this whole system, the sensory processing, integration is all off, you're going to get issues with executive function, how to do my homework, what to do next. If I punch Joey in the face, is there going to be consequences for that? They're not seeing that. And I'm going to hit this home real hard because this is an important part. Parents, look, if this system is not working and your kiddo goes over and pushes the kid off a jungle gym, breaks their clavicle, that kiddo could not predict that future outcome. They did not see that. They did not see that happening, okay? And they don't understand it. And so when we have kiddos, and part of the reason I'm talking about this is because you have a kiddo who behaves a particular manner, and then they get in trouble. But that little kiddo doesn't understand why they're in trouble. Look, in their mind, they didn't see that outcome happening. They didn't understand that punching Joey in the face will ultimately lead to them getting in trouble, both with you and the school. They didn't understand that they may lose friendships over that. They don't understand that their peers ultimately don't like that. They don't get the big picture. Okay, so takeaway is, yeah, so Monica, awesome point. Look, that was one study that showed that, okay? You do have the athletes, right, who are fantastic athletes that are and just phenomenal, right? And they have immaculate proprioception. Okay, I mean they're one-handed catches in the end zone or whatever, dunking, right? That is so. What can happen there? They can be more of an anomaly, but what can happen there is they still have what's called primitive reflexes. Okay, actually, this is the perfect time. I'm going to hit this real quick. I'm sorry, I am really giving some in-depth information. This may be too much. Please comment if this is okay, if I'm making sense. If I'm not making sense and I need to step back, I will. But please let me know if this makes sense. But I'm going to jump into this really quick here. Look, sensory integration. Let me explain all of this in a nutshell from a developmental standpoint. Okay, the first thing that happens in the womb while we're developing is we get something called primitive reflexes. They are programs written for us to survive. When mom puts her nipple here and I turn toward it to feed, that the baby did nothing other than do a natural reflex, essentially. They just did it on purpose. You put your finger and they grasp it, that's a reflex. Programs that are just automatic. This is how the baby survives. And so after that, we have motor and touch. Okay, what I just talked about with proprioception is involved in motor and touch, okay? And that's a very important one. Most kids are involved in the motor and touch. They have poor, like I said, again, 70-80% of those kids have poor perception. Yeah, there we go. And so, look, it goes primitive reflexes, motor and touch. This is why kids this is the importance of crawling. This is why crawling is so important. This is why kiddos start touching things to figure out how they're interacting in space. They're starting to develop predictive things, like they're understanding their environment. And so they start with movement and touch. This is why, too, you'll have an older kid with some sort of neurodevelopmental diagnosis, and they'll go back to movement and touch. Okay, so you get kids that can't sit still. Their brains are trying to understand their environment. And you'll always digress to the lowest or the most integrated system that you have. So you have a 12, 13, 14-year-old sitting in class. Or actually, this happens in first and third grade. We don't even need to go that far. You have a first grader or third grader. Third grade is when they start getting a lot. And their auditory, which is after movement and touch, and their visual systems have not been properly integrated. So they have the visual stimulus of interpreting what's going on in their environment. And the auditory, those things become overly easily overwhelmed in their body. So then they go to movement and touch. They'll start tapping their legs, moving their legs, bouncing around a little bit, because they're going to the lowest sense of interpretation of the environment. And so you'll see what we call, people call them digressions, regressions. You'll also just see deflective behaviors. They may actually become more physically active or sometimes even violent because of that emotional dysregulation on top of that. But you have to understand where these kids are. And if we don't understand where they are in this primitive reflex, movement, touch, auditory, and then visual system, that's how we develop as an individual from a nervous system standpoint. If we don't understand where they are in that system, they're going to struggle. And so, look, when that system is not properly integrated, again, lots of kids are stuck in this movement touch. And to go back to what you asked here, I can't go up on the comment, but you can have a kid, it's almost like they skip a level. So they didn't integrate the primitive reflexes, which are supposed to be integrated in the first year of life. And they get a good movement touch. They kind of integrate that well through repetition and stuff. And then they go into academics, but their primitive reflexes are still there. That's the lowest form of development. If that doesn't get integrated properly, just like with your sensory system, if that doesn't get integrated and those aren't removed, ultimately you will have an issue pop up. A lot of times with primitive reflexes, it's writing. So they'll write like this, or they can't write in a straight line, or we have dyslexic-like or what people commonly call dyslexic-like symptoms, meaning they'll have trouble reading, or oftentimes it's with math. The math essentially just doesn't make sense to them. Math is just a different form of reading, right? And so they read the words okay, but when it comes to math and the organization, executive function, they have trouble. And so you brought up a fantastic point, but you have to understand where they are in that development. And if there's any gap, you're always going to go to the lowest form. So, okay, I hope that answered your question. But let's talk about the sensory system. There are 8 ways to integrate your environment, okay? Meaning we have 8 senses. You're like, hold up. I got that wrong in 6th grade, or whatever. So there's 5 that most people know about, which is eyesight, smell, taste, hearing, all that fun stuff. But there's 3 other ones, okay? And these are the big guys right now as far as what's being missed. And so first one, the vestibular system. That's in your inner ear, okay? That is telling you where you are in relationship to gravity, okay? Gravity is very important for what? Movement and understanding your environment, right? So am I upside down, right, left, vestibular system. Kiddos who have vestibular issues typically they spin. They just like spinning, okay? They're trying to get input from that system, so they're stimming by spinning, right? And that's what they'll do. In adults, you typically get dizzy if you have a vestibular issue. You're like, whoa, my room is spinning, right? But with kiddos, they spin because they're not getting good input and their body's trying to figure out where they are in relationship to gravity. So what's the best way to do that? To activate it, right? So they spin. I have a how old is she? She's in 9th grade. She's in 9th grade, but she spins all the time. That's how she processes her environment. Is she spins. Like her mom is telling her to do something, she spins to interpret it, right? That's the only way she can understand it. Because if she sits still and she loses a sense, it'd be like, you trying to read something, but your eyesight comes in and out. That's not reasonable. How are you going to interpret that information? Well, her vestibular system is in high demand for information, so she spins in order to interpret her world. So after that, we have the autonomic nervous system. particularly the vagus nerve, which is a big nerve that runs from the top of our neck, goes into our gut. It is 80% information from our internal environment. So it's collecting it collects a lot of information. What's our organs doing? What's our oxygen level? All of this stuff. What is happening internally? Are we stressed? Is the bacteria that's being inundated by pesticides? Is it irritated? So forth, so on. And then we have the proprioceptive system. So the muscles, spines, joints, all of that stuff. Those three inner systems, the vagus or the autonomic nervous system, the proprioception, and the vestibular system, have to talk well. If you don't, it's like you've lost some of your external senses. So let's just pretend that just for example's sake, let's just pretend that your vestibular, your proprioceptive system, and your autonomic nervous system are not working well and in conjunction. It would be like if you had eyesight that was coming in and out, hearing that was coming in and out, and maybe smell. Let's put smell is coming in and out, and you're trying to navigate yourself through a stressful situation. Let's just say, I don't know, there's a fire and you're trying to get out of a house and navigate, and your eyes aren't working well, your ears aren't working well, and your nose isn't working well. And you're trying to navigate this. Okay, now we're just going to put a kid in a classroom where their internal system is not communicating well and they're trying to interpret their world. I hope that makes sense. Let me know, does that make sense? Am I making sense? Does that make sense if I muddled it or if I cleared some of this up for you? Oh, I like that. Yes, you have to understand where they are in the world of development, and understand that helps you understand how to communicate to them as well. The visual system is the last system to kick in. It's the most advanced, and so thus, if this is the last one you want to go to, but this is also why you'll have kids that will, like, I get this a lot with high schoolers. They'll look moody, right, and they'll look irritated. And so what they'll end up doing is they'll end up closing their eyes and putting headphones on. And so the visual stimulus was too much for them, and so they pull in visually, close their eyes, and then they stimulate a different system in an attempt to try to overcome some of this. All right. Okay, so just affrontations. This is information from the body, specifically from the joints, muscles, and tissues, and it is telling the brain where you are in space. Again, I'm reading this book called The Eye of the Vortex. It's a phenomenal book. His hypothesis, his premise is that executive function planning is all based on our ability to move. The reason that we can plan out events, that we can understand behavioral consequences, academic consequences, all of this motor movement consequences, is because the motor system, the spine and the joints all feed the prefrontal cortex. And in feeding that, it essentially feeds information here, which allows this prefrontal cortex to make appropriate decisions. And when you have what's called disaffrontation or loss of proprioception or body positioning, it ultimately alters that. The fantastic news is neuroplasticity, okay? So what this is essentially saying that our brains are not stuck. Old dogs can learn new tricks. They actually did a study last year, and they showed that I think they did a study with women in their 50s or 60s, doesn't really matter, who did yoga and meditated regularly, like on a weekly basis, about 5 times a week, had the neuroplasticity, so the ability to learn, function, create new connections in the brain, create harmony within the brain. So 50 and 60-year-olds who have the brain of a 25-year-old. So fantastic. We're not lost. There's answers. We can create and change things. This is fantastic. We have to love this. Your kiddo who may be stuck here does not have to be stuck here. The brain can learn new things. It does not have to stay in an imbalance of sensory information. This does not have to happen. There's ways around this. We can change things. All right. I just inundated you with a ton of science. I apologize. This is just I can't my comment thing is right over the right-hand side, so I'm going to try to move it here. But I want you to look at this kiddo, ADHD, emotional dysregulation. When he's on medication, feels like a zombie. The green line is where he's supposed to be, but the red line is where he's not. And so if you look on the upper picture, look how far his head goes off to the left. I mean, that's far. That's a vestibular system, a proprioceptive system that's not functioning properly and ultimately impacting the autonomic nervous system. Anxiety, constantly daydreaming. Dude's a sweet kid. He's just an amazing kid. But there's a difference when he's on medication, when he's not. And he's a zombie on medication. And he's a cool, vibrant kid when he's not, or when he's on a medication. But he was having so much trouble paying attention in class that they forced him to be on the medication. But when you look at this, your brain is always trying to keep you upright against gravity. Why? That puts you on the horizon. It helps you understand your environment, right? Helps put you and orient you against dangers, right? And so think of it that way. This little kid's head weighs about 6 pounds. You can kind of see it on the second slide. That first, it says your head weighs approximately 5.9 pounds. His effective head weight is 17 pounds. So his head doesn't weigh 17 pounds. It's like his head weighs 17 pounds to his body because it's so far forward. Okay? And so look, your brain's like, I got to keep you upright. So it's what is it doing? It's putting resources to pulling your head up. It wants to pull you upright, to keep you alive, to keep you safe. His head's off to the left and it's forward. So his brain is really confused as to where he is in space. Again, with that proprioception, I talked about that article, emotional regulation, ADHD. Look, if your brain is stressed out, if it's not planning on, giving information to the prefrontal cortex, good information, and this area right here is trying to keep you alive, you're not going to pay attention. Just does not happen. There's just no ands, ifs, or buts about it. That's how the body works. What medication does is it stimulates the prefrontal cortex often, and thus it helps you pay attention better. So mom has already reported better attention. He just started last month. She hasn't had to fight him with doing homework, which is really cool. She's noticed better emotional regulation, and she said he's not tripping and falling all over the place. A lot of these kids actually, I think, want to play sports, but they can't because they're just falling all over the place. Here's another one. This kid is 17 years old. Constantly sick, just chronic infection, always tired. Oh my gosh. His face was so far pulled forward. You can actually see he's a big guy. His head weighed about 17 pounds. But it's effectively 53.8. So it's heavy. It's just pulling him forward. So his airway is actually closing down. You want to know what a lot of people are missing out up there? Kiddos who do not have good airways. So the head's so far forward, you've actually closed down the airway. What does the brain need for processing information? Well, it needs oxygen. That's the number one. Right? I mean, that's number one. You need oxygen for a brain. Well, you've restricted the oxygen because your head's so far forward. Two, then you need food, right? You need glucose. The brain uses glucose. And then thirdly, you need information. You need stimulation from the body. That's how your brain functions. That's what helps the brain function. So you can imagine if you cut off the airway and your posture is poor, so it means you're getting poor information to the brain. You've cut out two of the three things needed to keep your brain activated and excited and paying attention. So yeah, and then it just ruined his immune system. Because his airway was so closed off, they had to remove. I started care with him, but he had already missed so much school that his mom said that we have to take out his tonsils and add noise because he couldn't miss another day of school. But if you look at him, I know the picture's a little blurry, but he's going way off to the right. His head weighs so much. Look, these are signs that the body's not functioning properly. These are symptoms. These just aren't the symptoms that we're commonly thinking about, right? Forward head posture, you're not thinking ADHD. But look, if your airway's closed off, and there's some studies, I have it in here, I think, where it's altering blood flow. So you're not getting blood flow and your air's cut down. And on top of it, you're getting altered information to the brain. Do you think you're going to have sleeping issues and attention issues? Yeah. Is his attention issues really related to ADHD? In my opinion, it was really related to he's just not getting enough oxygen. And therefore, he was struggling to just have any energy. I oftentimes will take, it depends on how old they are, if you'll get a good reading. I put little clips on your fingers to read your oxygen level bilaterally, so both sides. And I think he scored a 94 and 96. Now, to put that in perspective, an okay level, the minimal amount of oxygen you want is 97. That's the least amount we want. He's coming in 94, 95. When he goes to sleep, that means it drops to 84. He's already hypoxic sitting there. No activity. The only thing he did was lay on a table. So he has not exercised. He's not under high stress. He's not sitting in front of a classroom trying to learn anything. 94. He goes to sleep 84. He is in hypoxic state, meaning he is deficient in oxygen. And that will, put you into fight or flight, right? Your brain is in a constant alert, right, to keep you breathing. So his brain can never settle down and actually get deep sleep. So I don't think he's ever reaching deep sleep. On top of that, under stressful situations, our cells will actually lock up and they don't communicate well from each other. And they think that may play a role in things like diabetes and thyroid issues and all this stuff. So his brain was just literally, he's 17 years old, is just falling apart. Last one, this little cutie, emotional control issues, bedwetting, picky eater, digestive issues. So this one just started a couple weeks ago, about 3 weeks before we got quarantined. And when I talked to her mom just the other day, or saw her because we closed on Monday, bedwetting, it basically slowed down to once a week, from every night to once a week. I think it will continue to get better. Let me give you 2 reasons for bedwetting. There's 2 reasons, okay? One is the primitive reflex called the Gallant reflex. It's a reflex that helps us wiggle out of the birth canal. When that is not turned off, you'll have bedwetting issues, okay? Because it's literally like her brain could not interpret what was going on in the pelvis. So sometimes you'll have also bowel issues as well. But oftentimes it leads to, as they age, they get a little bit older, they have better control of that. But at night, because they're not getting good information, they often bedwet. Gallant also leads to attention issues. Emotional control, picky eater. Like her mom was ready to put her in school in this detailed food, I don't know, it was some sort of dietary change at school. I said, hold up, let's step back, let's work on the nervous system, right? Because that's the one that controls the GI system. So she started eating more food. They haven't had as much digestive issues. Mom's reporting emotional control is better, bedwetting, awesome stuff. But this little girl, Lexi, stop. Sorry. Her head is she's light as a feather. Her head weighs about 3 pounds. It's effectively 7 pounds. Craziness. Skip over that. Lexi, please be quiet. All right, so the autonomic nervous system. Again, there's 2 parts. I don't even know what time it is. Holy cow, we have gone long. If this has been too long, I apologize. Please let me know if you want me to continue to go. But look, I'm going to keep going until I get some comments from y'all. But the autonomic nervous system regulates our internal environment, and it's based off of information from both internally and external. There's 2 parts. There's the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And you need this balance. And without this balance, kiddos will struggle, adults will struggle. They think that an imbalance in the system is what leads to about 80% of chronic diseases. Okay? So you can kind of see just the outlining of all this, what it does. All right, I will continue to keep going. Look, if for whatever reason you need to jump off, this is still on here, okay? So this is what this system does. It's a very important one. This kicks on. We need this. This is how you start your day. This is how you end your day, right? The sympathetic system kicks it on, and then you shut down at night. kiddos, this is what I see all the time. 90% of kiddos with neurodevelopmental have some sort of dysregulation in the system, okay? Like dramatic, okay? Not minor, dramatic. Kiddos that get on the ADHD medication, it starts regulating this. Unfortunately, though, look, it's not going to regulate it for a long time, right? It's just the life of the medication. Then you need to re-up it. So once you get off the medication, then that system kicks back on, and you get this, very demonstrative response. Yeah, I don't think anybody does have plans. I know, but I've gone in. I don't want to overwhelm you. I want to be. This is here for you because again, my ultimate goal is to serve you all, and to give you guys a better understanding of your kiddos. All right. So look, these are symptoms of an autonomic imbalance, right? So what do we see? Most kiddos have anxiety, irritability, poor sleep, all of this stuff, and then you have the opposite, right? So look. High sympathetic, though, can lead to some of the stuff on the lower parasympathetic, meaning immune compromise. Because a lot of times what will happen is it's kind of like you have this high sympathetic, and you do that for years, right? You just high stress, and you burn yourself out. And then you go into this, like what we call low parasympathetic tone. And so it kind of flips, like the body just cannot keep up with it. And so you flip, and then you'll see kiddos who go from anxiety into depression, chronic fatigue, obviously related to poor sleep. And so if you're seeing these symptoms, a lot of them are going to be tied to this. All of them are going to be tied to this, really. What they're ultimately trying to do, pharmaceutical companies have tried to figure out a way. They're kind of successful in there's one thing that they'll do it for. I forget what it is. They're taking a chip and they're implanting it into your neck to hit that vagus nerve. And the goal of that is to control this balance. And they haven't figured out a good way to do this. Look, you can manipulate this system. It's called the autonomic nervous system because when they originally found it, they thought we had no control over this. But you do have control over this, okay? One of the big things that no one talks about, exercise. Exercise helps balance the system. Yoga, meditation is helping balance the system. It's essentially what it's doing. So what exercise does is it gives you a larger bandwidth to handle stress. When you're running, lifting weights, you're putting stress into the system to, give yourself more flexibility in there, okay? That's how exercise helps. When you do yoga and meditation and other things like that, what you're doing is you're taking that high sympathetic state and you're lowering it. So you're taking some of the stress off the system, giving yourself the opportunity to go into a parasympathetic state and start relaxing and healing. So look, this is one of the key systems. This system has to be addressed. Whatever dietary changes you make will not matter ultimately if this system is not addressed. All right. This is just a cute picture of a bunch of kids in the office at one time. The two here on, not on the far right, but the little girl in the pink and her brother behind her hugging her. Those are my kiddos. I want to take a break from the science just for a brief second, grab a drink here. But look they had markers out, cardboard out. Oh my gosh, it was a crazy morning. So, all right. So what's next? It'll take a village. Look, that is part of why I'm investing so much right now into neurodevelopmental stuff and understanding this. Because ultimately, look, I cannot be everything to everybody, right? And so I need to know who to refer you to and what the next step is. I have a lot of success with just helping kids ultimately and essentially kind of getting them to the place they need to be. But I also work with other people like OTs and PTs and neural ophthalmologists. In my goal is to always, I need a village around me, and you all need a village around you too, just to help you get through this and understand this stuff. So where's the disconnect? All right, so my world. This is what I'm going to talk about here. So a little bit. So in chiropractic, they always talk about a misalignment of the spine. What we call that in chiropractic is called vertebral subluxation. And it's not so much a misalignment, okay? Because if that was the case, then I wouldn't ever be able to help somebody with like scoliosis, right? But remember how I was talking about proprioception and body positioning? That is relayed through the spine and the joints of the spine. In every joint, but a lot comes from the spine. And what happens is, like for instance, with my son, he looked like the skull and spine on the right hand side. When he came out the birth canal, he was like this, and just cranked. He had colic immediately. He struggled to breastfeed. All these things. I mean, it just started. I mean, within days of being born. And so what happens is we've already altered the information from the top of his neck. Top of his neck sends information to his jaw and other things and how to suck and the tone. And so my kiddos, what happens is when your joints get locked up and these receptors get information, what they do is they'll lock. So they create spasm and they alter the tone of the spine. Let's see if I have one here. I don't have one. In a few slides, I'll show you what it looks like. But what we use is a technology that reads the information of the muscles. So how much background noise are these kiddos getting? And they are getting immense amount of information. I mean, immense. It is incredible to see these kids sitting here. So you saw the posture ones. And look, when these kids... sorry, I read the comment for a second. Sorry. When these kids are sitting here, right, you saw those posture ones. So when you go through and you're reading the muscles, right, it's reading the current along the muscles. And it's based off of 100. So it should take you 100 energy units to sit here. These kiddos are sitting at 3, 4, 5. So they're 4 or 5 times the energy is being pushed into their brains. And so they're having to sit there, pay attention with all this background information. It is insane. And you don't know how they could do it. They can't do it, right? But this is impacting their executive function and their brain, how their whole brain is coming together. And so we just need to start talking about this stuff because these kids do not need to be on medication. They really need some simple things to connect their brain and body and helping the brain function as a whole, because it should not cost you 4 or 5 times the amount of energy to sit there. Think about when you're moving then. 4 or 5 times the amount of information to control and regulate that. It would be much higher. All right. So this is just a picture of one of my sensory kiddos who is in Latin dance. She won a medal. She's a fun case. So she had a couple different things. Talking about a village, right? We found out that she had so she could never get good posture. She had a really severe tongue tie. So her tongue was actually tethered to the bottom of her mouth. She couldn't stick it out. She couldn't do that, or at least not well. And so this is another topic, but the fascial plane. So there's fascia that surrounds all of our tissues. It goes all the way down. It goes down the front of us, and so this was all tied down. So she was literally being pulled forward. In dance, they would have to force her up because she couldn't literally stand up. So anyways, she's just been a cool girl to work with. She had knees that were buckled together, right? So they knock knees, what people commonly call them, and their legs would come out so she looked kind of like this. This way, here we go, like this. So her knees would come together, but she couldn't get her ankles together. And so she was trying to dance. She had knee problems, ankle problems, hip problems, very picky eater. And so through care, we've gotten her knees here we go. Her knees are together now. She's a better eater. She used to choke sometimes on her food too because of that lip tie. She can come up right now and do it without having somebody to force her up. So it's been cool. Her sensory issues have started to improve. But she was an older kid that came in. They had been to everybody. And it wasn't until we started looking at the root problem that we started addressing this all. So, structure affects function. Look, the structure of your child's spine, the tone of their spine, the structure of their skull is ultimately going to impact how they function, how they can navigate themselves internally, externally, and how they're going to interpret this, okay? And so look, when you have these vertebral subluxations, what can happen? Autonomic imbalance. That's one of the first things we see, right? So they're stuck in that fight or flight mode. Or unfortunately, if they've been there long enough, they have that low parasympathetic response. Decreased blood flow, that's based off of just the head going forward, but also the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, when it's not balanced and you don't have that good parasympathetic response, you have increased inflammation, gut inflammation, neural inflammation. And so these kids are just chronically inflamed. You're chronically sick because of this. And it's just leading, it's just stressful on all parties, right? Parents come in and they're just ready to pull their hair out. There's no, like, where is this coming from? Look, this is where you have to start. This is the foundation. If you don't address how kids develop, then you're not addressing the problem. Look, there's a rhyme and a reason to why we develop this way. You have to address this, okay? Cerebral spinal fluid alteration. So this is a big one. This is what we do with craniosacral work. Look, craniosacral work is very important, and there's fantastic research that shows that it helps kiddos with this. This is fluid that surrounds the brain and the spinal cord, and it flushes out inflammation. For the past, 80 years, chiropractors have been talking about this. They just did a study last year that said there's massive waves, about, I'm trying to think, 6 waves an hour. I forget the timeline. But what it does is these massive waves, they described it as massive waves of CSF fluid, are pushed through the spine. Okay, you're not moving. It normally gets moved through like the action of your pelvis moving and all sorts of things. You're just sleeping there. It moves through the spine up into the brain, and it washes away inflammation. What they think, though, is if your structure cannot pump that fluid naturally, that it becomes stagnant, and then ultimately you cannot wash away the inflammation, and you have neural inflammation. And then lastly, you can have mechanical tension. This has something to do with the spinal cord and the tethering and all this other stuff. But basically, let's see if I can do this correctly. When you're like this, you're literally pulling on the spinal cord. The spinal cord is actually anchored in the spine. There's points where it ties together. And what you're doing when you start coming forward and all like this, you're literally pulling your spinal cord over things like discs and joints that it's not supposed to be pulled over. And you're ultimately altering the function and the proprioception of the information. One of the most common one of the most evident ones I saw, and you'll commonly see is when elderly people start shuffling their feet. It's because their spinal cord has been draped over like a disc or something like that, and the brain's not getting good information. So they shuffle to stay upright because they don't know where their feet are. It's crazy. Yeah, I saw it in one of my friend's dads, and I was like, how did they miss this? And he fell, and his health has declined since then, so it's really sad. But look, if your brain doesn't know where you are in space, you're going to start adapting. All right, we're going to start speeding up here. Cervical, okay, so this is a chiropractor in Hrv. I follow all of her stuff, but it was showing a neck adjustment improved, basically motor and sensory information integration, right? So we had the reception, and you saw that slide, but integration was the last. So they're saying that a neck adjustment improves integration of the brain and body. This is one that's showing that neck adjustment improved that balance, that autonomic nervous system, helped take you out of that fight or flight system. And then this is the same thing. So in our office, we do what's called an Hrv study. You kind of see it right there. Hrv. So what we do is you're looking at the heart rate. A heart rate that is stagnant and just kind of beating like this and doesn't change is a heart rate that's in fight or flight. So we monitor that over 5 minutes. And if the kiddo's old enough, we also monitor their sweat, right? So that's part of the response. And what we're doing is seeing how their body's responding in a non-stressful scenario. Meaning if they're stressed out in a room with mom or dad sitting there not doing anything, if their brain is acting like there's a bear in the room and there's nothing in there, now imagine when you put that brain under stress, when they're having to learn new material in a place with lots of kids that are moving and this auditory stimulus, and you're not allowed to move, right? Because you're stuck in a chair. Imagine that. It just cranks their system up. And so that's one of the things that we work on. This is just a nice little note. That's actually my daughter. I didn't have a picture of this little one. Look, again, I hope that you all are walking away from this understanding, like, if we address the root problem, the thing that's causing these symptoms, these kiddos can thrive and have phenomenal success. We are not locked into inherently having to live under, in my opinion, the oppression of a diagnosis, because unfortunately, what I'm seeing in my clinic, I'm not diagnosing them, right? But what I'm seeing is these kids are getting a diagnosis and then being that diagnosis, and I don't want that for them. All right, this is my friend's son. Look at this. He just one day he started to come out of himself. He refused to be touched. His dad couldn't touch him, and so his dad was kind of just lost to what to do. But one day he made a change, and he started coloring himself. Ironically, he started coloring around his gut, and so his dad thinks he was trying to communicate that way. But his dad snapped this picture, and look at what the stress did to his system. I mean, you could see a shoulder that's down. His hips are way off to the right. If you go from his right ear to his left ear, there's probably about a half an inch difference there. This is a system that's locked in stress, okay? This is not a system that's communicating well, moving well, functioning well. And so this is what I'm seeing with my kiddos. When you address this, when you can we can take the stress, the movement stress, the mechanical stress off of the brain, then you can allow the brain to start functioning as a whole. And when it starts functioning as a whole, then you start getting these symptoms start going away, and you can see some phenomenal stuff. All right, yeah, so he drew lines on here. Who drew lines on here? All right, so this is a cool little story of Brett. Brett has had many EEGs, so they're looking at the brain. So this is under care. With no recorded seizures, Brett has been 95% seizure-free. Think about that. The body's collecting all this information. And really, what's kind of cool is what they've determined is the information coming into the brain determines the frequency of the brain. Okay? So it determines the literal frequency of the brain. And so when you're adjusting and you're changing, you're exercising, you're literally changing the frequency of the brain. What people have thought or proposed is that seizures is essentially like a brain reset. The frequencies are not working, and so there's a brain reset. And so to see this little story, how cool, 95% seizure-free. Imagine you could just kind of see the difference right to left in this little boy's life. Phenomenal. All right. So this is just an imbalance. This is literally something that we do in the office, and it's talking about temperature difference. So that's just a regulation. So we're looking at the autonomic nervous system, and when they have this dysfunction, you can see down there, neurological pathologies, neurodevelopmental stuff, right? All right, this is just a scan of somebody. Just want to show you. So this is what we're doing in the office, but you can just see in the scaling system right here, green, blue, red. Green is mild, blue is moderate, red is severe, and you can just see the difference in degrees from right to left. So there's literally a temperature difference right to left along their spine. And what that's saying is there's all this dysregulation going up the spine. So the spine in the autonomic nervous system is not able to regulate itself well. Then what you kind of commonly see with that too then is you'll see like, you might see like, where they have the hands and feet are cold. What is that called? What is that called? Somebody help me out here. I'm drawing a blank on it. But that's common. After years of this happening, where the blood flow and the autonomic nervous system are not functioning well, they'll have altered blood flow. And so it starts pulling away from the feet and hands. Raynaud's syndrome. There we go. Raynaud's syndrome. All right, here's another one. Just look at it. For me, this is a very stressed kiddo. All one side. Okay, so we have, it's not even like back and forth. This is just one side, all temperature difference, and it's just, a lot going on. How is a kiddo supposed to function in a world when the brain and body are already stressed? All right, this was in a cool study. It showed that so they actually changed the metabolites in men's brain after a neck adjustment. So the same with kiddos. So you're literally changing the frequency, right? But you're also changing, and frequency determines hormonal function, like it alters hormones. So you're getting metabolite changes. So you're literally even changing how the brain is chemically processing. And this is just another one. When we adjust, we're integrating. Remember that sensory system. We're integrating into the prefrontal cortex. All right. This is a study. I'm going through this kind of quick because I hit the science heavy, and I want to answer some questions before we go too long. Look, altered spine tone, misalignment, all that stuff alters CSF fluid. So you can have stagnation. Actually, you kind of see this in kiddos. You can tell if a kiddo's had poor or stasis, pooling of CSF, because their head will kind of expand really quick when they're younger. And they may have some GI issues. That's a common one. Immune system functioning. But you want this stuff pumping, because if you have neural inflammation, you need to get rid of it. And that's the only way that it does that. All right. Got a testimony here. Those are my kiddos. I'm going to skip that one and go to here. So what do you think causes these vertebral subluxations? Answer below. Let me know what you think. What do you think is the cause of these? I want to hear. So I'm going to explain this while I wait for an answer. I hope you all saw that. I can't tell. These vertebral subluxations are like, oh my gosh, it's been too long. I need coffee, I think. In a house, we have the breaker switch, right? When you blow a fuse, too much of something blew the fuse. So I don't see any comments. I know there's a delay. So what we're seeing is, stop skipping. I'm sorry. Stress is the cause, right? So stress. We have physical, chemical, and emotional stress. I'm sorry. It keeps doing that. So let's go to here. Stress. That's right. Stress, whether it be chemical, physical, or emotional. 1,000 infants were checked in the first month of life. 80% were found to have a misalignment. I've seen another study, a newer one that they did last year. They're saying upwards of 99 now. I think that has a little bit to do with C-section rates now. And so just craziness going on. All right. Same study. I'm just going to kind of breeze through some of this because I want to answer questions here at the end if I can. 1,250 were evaluated during the first 5 days of life. 90% had suffered from birth trauma and strain of the neck and cranium. That could just be birth, going through the canal, or C-section, or some sort of intervention, and 10% had severe trauma. So this is adding to what we have going on. All right, I'm going to skip some of this just because I want to answer questions again. KISS syndrome, that is basically, it's a syndrome is by a German pediatrician. Phenomenal, really cool stuff. He saw 20,000 kids over in Germany. But he basically was saying that he was finding this KISS syndrome, which is basically a sprained strain of the upper neck, in a vast majority of the kids he was seeing. Long labor times or rapid delivery were common. C-sections, extraction or with vacuum, twins, triplets. So the birthing process can be very traumatic, and when it does, it impacts ultimately the upper neck. And the upper neck ultimately plays a role in the autonomic nervous system. All right, so those drug commercials, they always have like side effect commercials. So these are the side effects that have been reported for asymptomatic people who have just gone to a chiropractor just to go to a chiropractor. And so I just kind of fun because they're always so negative, right? All these terrible things, but this is some good stuff like, muscle strength and overall athletic ability and endocrine and autonomic nervous system and respiration. And so that, they did a study here with the military on special forces. They showed that they had quicker response time. They also showed the difference between conditioning and muscle strength. And I don't remember the stats off the top of my head, but those who had not, so they're adjusting for low back pain in this study, but those who had low back pain and didn't get chiropractic decreased by 7 to 10%. Those who had who got adjusted increased by 7 to 10%. So there was a 20% gap in physiology right there, because those who were being adjusted could handle the stress, were getting stronger, and had better conditioning. All right, so what does it look like in our office? Look, it is chaos. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes it's a lot of fun. That is, we're actually switching up the office a little bit, but that is just a playroom. Kids are just coming through all afternoon, playing. You know, we got my daughter and one of her best friends just sitting there, just having a good time and just playing. And so it is an environment where we have a lot of fun. I don't ever want your child to come in, or any child to come in, and feel like this is a white coat, kind of like just, you know, whatever sort of deal. Like, this should be a fun environment. I want the stress of a doctor's office to come down, and I want them to feel at home. Meaning, I want them to be comfortable there. And honestly, that's what happens after a few visits. Kids come in, they're playing catch. It's not uncommon for a tag to burst out somewhere around 4 o'clock in the afternoon when we're getting more kids in after school. It is a fun environment. And so that is one of the things that we've tried to make it very purposeful about this. Look, stress is causing this. Stress is impacting this. So we want to take that stress off for you and the kiddos. This is a fun testimonial that my friend shared and gave me permission to share. So I want you to listen to this.
It's been really cool since my son Nick has been going to Dr. Steve. We've seen a lot of improvement in him, a lot through his speech. His vocabulary has grown vastly. He's using a lot more words. I'm able to have more conversations with him. He's on the autism spectrum, and so it's been a while since I never really expected to be able to have such good conversations with him, but now he's expressing himself, and I really get to see his personality shine through a lot more, so it's been really a blessing. Even like when he's running and playing, I can see he has more control over his body. We're just seeing so much improvement in all areas of his life. At school, they've been really impressed in the last few months. He's been growing so much, been able to be more focused, and be able to just be more successful.
How you doing?
Be more successful in school altogether.
Good job. Look, is that your hand? Yeah. Where's Mom? Look, come here. Let's see. There she is. Yes. You're silly. You're silly. You want to say hi to the camera? Hi. Hi. Here. How about like this? You and me. Hi. Hi up there. All right. Bye. We'll see you later. All right. Thank you. No, that's great.
All right, so let me see. I think if I do this, I come onto the screen. All right, so let me figure this out. See how I can I get onto here and see comments? Let me see here. All right, so let's answer questions. This has been a long talk, way longer than I anticipated. I apologize. What questions do you have if you're still there? What can I help you with? What things can I address? Give it a minute here. Unfortunately, I don't think I can. Oh, I can. There we go. All right. What questions? I honestly don't even know if anybody's still on. I talk forever, so I do appreciate that. I'll give you another minute to respond. I talked a lot. In the end, I hope that you understood your child better. Look, we need the brain to function as a whole. And in order for it to function as a whole, we have to have good communication between the brain and the body. And if we don't, then the brain cannot function as a whole. And this is when we see symptoms come up. Okay, Tourette's. All right, still here. Okay, so people are here. Okay. So do you have a specific question about Tourette's? If you do. So it falls under this. Under this NDD diagnosis, okay? And there are a couple things that I've seen, and with there's a lot that can happen. Basically, in my opinion, what is happening is the brain is becoming overwhelmed with information. So it's kicking on and kicking into a system. And so it's a stress thing. Now, with my Tourette's patients, what I've typically seen is fewer symptoms. They tend to go away. They may still have it, but the symptoms kick up with tend to be high stressful, high stress, right? And so after, under care, then and their ability to better adapt to stress, they seem to respond much, much better. I had a mom who just would come in any time that the symptoms kicked up because that was a long time ago when I started practice. I would do things differently now, but I would adjust his upper neck and he would do like a 180. It was kind of crazy cool. All right. Let's see what other questions. All right. Still here. Okay, still here. You're welcome for the information. All right. So how long does it take to see changes? Changes typically start within a few weeks. It just depends on how old they are, the amount of stress, and what's going on. But typically within a few weeks. So I tell everybody, within the first 4 weeks, you should expect change. It doesn't have to be demonstrative change. Typically, sleep is one of the first ones. They typically sleep better. There seems to be a lot of confusion in there. Some kids sleep really well, but they don't sleep deep. So the kids start to sleep better. But also the other things I see relatively quick are emotional regulation. Tends to start either basically what's happening is the prefrontal cortex as that starts kicking in, and they realize that they don't they don't have to have an emotional response, like they have a little bit more bandwidth. That tends to be one of the bigger ones. And then did any of your kids have sensory issues like with clothes or anything? Like did anybody have kids that don't like pants or shirts or anything like that? That's another big one. So they're able to interpret that the clothes are not an irritant. One of the big ones is that Gallant reflex, which is bedwetting. That makes tags very irritating. All right, hey, let me. I forgot to do this at the end. Look, if you were wanting to schedule something with me, we have two options here. One, I'll put a link here in the comments in just a moment when I'm done. One, you can, or you may have gotten an email from me already because this was only supposed to be, and talk was supposed to end a little while ago. You have two options. You can schedule a free phone consult with me. Happy to do it. Love it. We'll go in depth into your kiddo. We can talk. I set aside about 10 to 15 minutes. We have much more free time now with us being closed down for the next week. So if that's something you want, you let me know. I'll set aside a half an hour for you to talk about you and your kid. If you're like, hey, I want to get started with you, for you, because you're in here, our exam is typically $197. It's $97 for you, okay? But all I ask is a $25 deposit just to hold your spot. I know we're in kind of some ambiguous times with things coming up. Look, the city of Dallas asked us to be closed until the 4th, and so we're going to be closed until the 4th. Assuming that Dallas is okay and they're going to allow us to open, we're going to open up that starting on the 4th. We're going to be open on the 4th, seeing people that Saturday and then through the rest of the week. If dates need to change, that's not an issue. But if you want to hold your spot with me, please let me know. The link should be there. I'll put it in here. You can either do a free phone consult. Happy to do that. Or if you want to sign up and get that exam for $97, let me know. It's just a $25 deposit. That link will just ask you to put your credit card in there, so I'll charge you the $25, and that's it. Also, we can talk more. Because this is such a stressful time, too, we're going to offer this. If you have more than one kiddo that you'd like to get checked, we're going to waive that second visit or that second fee. So there's not two. So if you had two kids, it'd still just be the $97 for the exam. We'll do both of them and can give you, whatever information you want to know, credit care plan, all that fun stuff. All right. Let me go back here. Michelle, I don't know how to answer your question about insurance. Look, what I give you a receipt that can be submitted to insurance, and I do my very best to give you. I put all the codes that are accepted, but I don't know if your insurance company will cover it because there's all sorts of different companies out there. So I don't know how to answer that question. I'm happy to give you the receipt, and you can call them up ahead of time and ask them as well. But however I can help you in that scenario, please let me know. About 4 weeks. How can parents help with the stress? Okay, so I'm going to answer this question. Connie, look, stress has multiple layers, okay? Prediction is a big one with anxiety and ADHD, okay? Kiddos with this stuff do not have good working memory, and they're anxious. And so having a routine is good, okay? Morning routine, evening routine. Look, probably most of us are most of us are out of our schedule right now because right, all this going on, right? So create a routine for them. Create a routine, and also if you're at home with them, write out your routine with them so they can understand what's going on. It's gonna take out some of the curveballs for them. Okay. Secondly, if you have the opportunity, get them outside, get some vitamin D. You help them get out and move. Movement is calming to the brain. It's stimulation to the brain, and therefore it's calming. And so make sure that they're getting out and moving around. I don't know how your classrooms are now structured. We have some on videos and so forth and so on. I don't know how it is, but you need to give them the opportunity to get out, move, play, and you need to write out a routine. That is some of the best stuff that people have incorporated, and it helps. Thirdly, if they're old enough to have a journal, have them journaling things. Because what you're having them do is work through some of that internal turmoil and anxiety and helping them try to figure out what they're feeling. A lot of these kids don't understand what they're feeling. So if they can start writing it out, or in some of my kiddos, they're so anxious, so overwhelmed by what's going on, you need to help them see good things, right? So, hey, mom and dad get to spend the next week with you. Hey, we get to, have them write this stuff out. Help them ingrain, because when they physically do this versus just verbally saying something, when they're writing it out, they're integrating the sensory motor system. Fine movements are very important for memory and other things. And so having them kind of be thankful for some stuff like that and just having them focus on the positive right now is really huge. I'm going to do a video. Actually, I posted in here. I do have a certification in posture and ergonomics, so I will talk about some stuff for y'all, for your students at home, to help them sit properly so that their posture isn't breaking down like this, so that it helps them overall. I'll do a video for you all. I'm not going to put it out in the public, just for you since you're here, and help you all out. Edith, if you want to get started, I'll put that link in here. Let me know what you want to do. I'm happy to help. Please let me know. Origin, onset, related symptoms. Okay. Is there any literature you could recommend besides Google searches on the impact of processed food in these things? Yeah, let me. Mind-gut connection. Very good. Yeah, read that. So read that. That's a great book. Mind-gut connection. I will give you another resource that can help as well. I'll put some links in there for you. Can practicing better posture help to correct and maintain? Yes. So posture. Look. Posture is an important thing. Posture is information to the brain. I know you all haven't been looking at this. I've looked at this. Look, there's a strong correlation. The old lady on the cane and dementia is like this, right? She's decreased good information to her brain. She's altered blood flow and CSF fluid. Good posture impacts the brain. Sit up straight. Look, they didn't know why it worked back in the day. When your grandma would hit you on the back of the head. Sit up straight. That impacts the brain. The brain is always. This is when you sit up or upright, it's a very efficient stance against gravity, right? Versus when you start coming forward, and in those examples I gave where your head weighs, 50 pounds. Look, your body is not efficient. It is not coordinated and efficient. If you want to navigate and move through space well, which is very important for living and thriving, that's what your brain needs. That's what it craves. It needs good, efficient movement. Posture is key. Yeah, hates jeans. Yep, hates cotton. Yeah, so you don't like that. So a lot of times that's the gallant reflex, and they don't like, since their system is the frequency is so high, the touch on their skin is actually irritant to them. to you and I, it doesn't feel like anything, but to them, it's amped up immensely. So that we need to change that frequency. That frequency needs to change in order to help them. I'll put that testimony in here. It's a 5-minute testimony. Sorry, it's so long. But that little girl, one of the first things that the mom noticed was she was able to wear jeans. So pretty cool. What do your appointments entail, and what frequency of sessions do you recommend? Okay, so the initial appointment, so the first one's an exam. Go through all that stuff, figure out where they are, what's going on with them. Then we come back, we do a report of findings. I tell you what I found, what primitive reflexes, what movement was going, what the movement was telling me, what their, HRV said, all that fun stuff. And then after that, I divide my sessions up into a couple different things. We essentially have 3 phases of care, as what I'll call it. So the initial phase is us just kind of changing the frequency and getting good input to the brain. The second phase is going to be like reinforcing this new information. And so the first phase is going to be me doing craniosacral work and chiropractic care. That's it. I don't want to overwhelm. I want to change the frequency of what's going on in the brain. The second one is still craniosacral work and chiropractic care, but then I'll do some small therapies with them. Like we'll play catch while they're balancing on it's called this. Oh my gosh. It's an instability disc, essentially. It's a disc that kind of moves a little bit, so it forces their body to figure out what's going on and to maintain posture while they catch. So we're taking a complex thing and we're tacking it on so that after the adjustment and the craniosacral work, all this new information is being integrated more properly. The reason I don't do it in the phase 1 is because I want to clear out junk information, change the frequency, and then reinforce the new information. And then phase 3 is really just kind of wellness and maintaining what we've achieved. Frequency, that's kid by kid basis. I usually ask for the first few weeks about 3 times a week, and then we can cut it down. Once we start changing that frequency, we can start changing the intensity of the frequency of the visits. But I need to create dynamic change in that brain in order to start getting it. Change will still happen, but it's how quickly do you want it, right? Do you want it to take a long time or a quick time? So I found that the more consistent we are, the more that we're on top of this, kind of like exercise, right? If you want to prep for a marathon and you ran every 2 weeks, look, you probably can still run the marathon at some point in time, but just do you want to run it well or do you just want to finish it? My goal, because I want to serve this community, is for my kids to run marathons very, very well. I want my kids off of medication. I want them in classrooms where they're functioning well, they're around their friends, and they're able to participate not only in their classroom but also with family members and all that fun stuff. So my ultimate goal is for all of my kids, but I still have a straggler here and there, to be off of medication completely and just to keep them going and thriving that matter. Yes, tags or irritation. Yeah. So that's a lot. That's a sensory integration. So the process is the sense in the process are corrupted information. So the integration is bad. A lot of that has to do with the glottal reflex, which is a primitive reflex. So primitive reflex, motor touch, auditory, visual. So they're somewhere stuck in that, either that primitive reflex, motor touch area. That's where your kiddo is from a neurodevelopmental standpoint. So for them, they need to move a lot and they need to touch a lot in order to understand their environment. So if that's your kiddo, just understand that that's what they're doing. They need movement and touch to help them. It calms their system, helps them understand their environment. So that's very, very key. All right. Yeah, okay. Didn't see. So you had frontal flattening. So cranial. So the cranium is an important thing. It houses the CSF fluid, right? So it's pumping that, right? So yes, if there's not enough CSF pumping over it, absolutely could trigger some stuff. The cranium also has points for dura, or fascia, and fascia plays a role in pulling you forward and some other things. So, I would certainly say it could play a role. It's probably that and something else. There are certainly kids who have cranial issues. Sorry. that don't have ADHD, but it certainly could be a cofactor in that. Absolutely. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, hates writing. Okay. So that's interesting. I don't know why he hates writing. Maybe you could tell me, elaborate a little bit more on that. Um, Gallant, reading two things at one time. So writing could be a thing because writing is a visual thing, right? So it's visually, and you have to cross midline to do that. So he may have not developed well visually. He may not have integrated his visual system well, and so that may be why he does not like writing. That's what I would guess. So, and that could also be related to primitive reflexes. There's one called the ATNR reflex and the SDNR reflex. Those are reflexes that are integrated during like crawling and things. They allow us to crawl across the midline. So kiddos who don't have that integrated typically have trouble writing, reading, and especially mathematics. They do not do well with mathematics. Galant is spelled G-A-L-A-N-T. Galant. Galant reflex. Yes, Galant. Yes, there you go. You found it. Okay, cool. As a kindergarten teacher, I notice a huge difference in children's attention by the way they sit. The problem is that the school chairs are too big. They can't reach the floor as my son's knees. Yeah. The chairs are not designed for these kids. Just like cars are just kind of generically designed, right? I'm 6'3". I'm not a smaller guy, so I need like a SUV or something to sit in these cars. But they need the touch. They actually their brains want their feet to be touching the ground. The feet are a big touch point of information, right? And so they want that. So they're gonna want to be in seats that are better suited to them. Unfortunately, that's not something that I can change, but schools need to start doing this. If you're a teacher, and if you found this helpful, if you all want me to come in and talk on this, I would love to do that. So if there's any opportunities, any teachers in here, and you think it would help other teachers or even help you or help, anybody else in the school, let me know. I'd love to do that. You are so welcome. Homeschooling, yes. I think homeschooling is better for a couple different reasons. So I was homeschooled. I don't know if I mentioned that. I was homeschooled, and I read a lot. So that was my primary skill, is reading. But what it allowed me to do was get out and play more, to be honest with you. I was out, like my mom made sure that we got out for an hour and a half, 2 hours during midday. I would always go play, go shoot hoops in high school and stuff like that. I could burn off, I could move and essentially stimulate my prefrontal cortex. And so, I do think it was helpful. It also allowed for brain breaks. And so my mom, I didn't have to sit there exactly for 50 minutes or whatever, classroom time is. I could get up and move. And because, also because there's not 30 other students looking at me, like if I need to get up and move and stretch or just kind of walk around for a second or go get a glass of water, it helped. So look, I'm not, school systems are locked into a lot of stuff. And so it's very tough for teachers. They have a lot on their plates to handle. And so, I see a lot of teachers and they just talk about the difficulties that it is. And so ultimately my goal here is just to help teachers understand what's going on with their kids. But yes, homeschooling could help. It'll help them focus. Yeah, absolutely. Look, if their auditory and visual systems are not integrated and you have kiddos moving around or a teacher up in front and there's side noise from their neighbor talking and the teacher's talking, they can't handle that stress. They just can't. The brains have not developed to the point where they can process all that information well, and thus they can't focus, right? Look, if your brain's stuck in that fight or flight, what's it looking for? It's looking for danger. It's looking for a bear, tiger, whatever, cheetah, all that fun stuff. It is looking for danger. Danger comes in the form of sound and movement. So what's your brain going to look at? Sound and movement. And these poor kids, they're not being picked on, but they're being told, why can't you focus? Look, the brain's not designed to focus during this state. You're literally forcing them into an artificial scenario with touch and sound, and they're being forced to do this. So absolutely, yeah, it could help from that aspect. Not that they can't go back to public school or whatever schooling. afterwards. But, if you need to catch them up, or if you need to get them, started with some stuff and integrate those systems so that they can go back into that environment. Yeah, I would love for you to talk to your admin. If I can help, please let me know. Okay, yeah. So your finger is in his son. Look, so your son. Look, you and I know we have little receptors, little mechanoreceptors in here, right? And so these mechanoreceptors tell us how much we're pressing on the pencil. His mechanoreceptors are not sending good information. So he, at some point in time, does not know that he's gripping onto the pencil for life and death. I don't know why I'm doing this face. Well, he's doing like this because those receptors aren't getting good information. So he's gripping in an attempt to feel the pencil, essentially. And in doing so, it's going to eventually hurt, right? You can only grip onto something for so long before it hurts. So he has a mechanoreceptor issue in his fingers, which is pretty common. That's like a proprioceptive issue. And so that is ultimately it's altering the signals, the frequency to the brain. It alters and changes the frequency of pain in the brain too. They think this is what goes on with those with chronic pain as well, is they have an altered sensation in the receptors that has altered the frequency, and thus their perception of pain is altered, and so they get more chronic pain. Fantastic. What have I... this is long. I hope you all are okay with this. I did not intend for this to be this long. Anything else I can help you with? Y'all should get emails from me with some more resources. I hope this was helpful. It seems like y'all have enjoyed it. Is there anything I didn't make clear, or is there something I was confusing on? How can I help you? Also, hey, if you have any other parents, or you're part of a group or have other parents that they could benefit from this, please just invite them to the group and they can watch this replay. I want to help as many parents as I can. This is my passion. I love serving this community. There is nothing more rewarding than helping a kid essentially escape their diagnosis or seeing them thrive. I love doing this. This is so fulfilling for me. So if there's a parent that you know, or maybe you have some friends or you're in a group, please invite them to this group and they can watch this replay. So I know my kid's extremely smart when we do one-on-one at home, but the classroom structure is what you get complies. Yeah, okay. So your poor kiddo. Look, your kid is intelligent. None of this has to do with intelligence. These kids are very, very intelligent. And look, some of these kids, when they focus, some people call ADHD and ADD like superpowers and stuff like that. Under the right conditions, these are absolute superpowers because some of these kids can focus in on things and master them. It is insane what the focus they can have. Now, in a classroom, again, this visual and auditory. One-on-one, this is not a tremendous amount of stimulus. It can be for some kids, don't get me wrong. But for your kiddo, this is not a lot of stimulus. He can take this. His brain can handle and integrate the visual and the auditory one-on-one. Put him in a room though, because those systems are not integrated properly. In a room, he is essentially being flooded and overwhelmed with information. Too much information for his brain to process, to sense, integrate, all that fun stuff. So that is key. He will always do better in a one-on-one scenario. Very intelligent, no doubts about it. Some of those ones, the pictures you saw, like those kids with the poor posture, very intelligent kids. They are, when they will like something, one of those kids is basically a pro in, semi-pro in like video gaming. Like when he likes something, he's very, very good at it. The problem is when he gets too much information, a sensory, auditory, visual, then his system can't interpret all that information. Because look, your brain's always trying to keep you alive. In order to learn things, you have to be in a calmer state. But when you're not, because the autonomic nervous system isn't functioning well and your auditory and visual system have not integrated, doesn't matter. So Oh, thank you. Hey, look, I'm not going away. Also, I hope you know that, right? Like, I'm not going away. No matter what happens, whether you do a phone consult or come in for exam, like, look, I'm still a resource for you all. Like, this isn't just a one and done. Like, that was a great talk, cool. Like, you can still ask questions. This is, I'm not, there's, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. So, look, you know, whether or not you proceed forward and seek help with me, please don't go anywhere. I'm here to help. Like, look, I'll ask questions. I'll put on more stuff. If you guys want me to dive deep into a particular topic, like sensory integration or ADHD or whatever, I'm happy to do that for you all. Look, this is about you. This is about your kiddos and serving that community. So, all right. Anything else? Any other questions I can answer for you? So my wife asked me how long this was going to be when before I went out. I said, it'll be about 75 minutes. That's funny. I know there's a slight delay, so I'll give it another second. If not, then I'm going to get off, grab some lunch. But I'm still here, so I'll answer questions. Again, I'll put that link in there as well if you want to sign up for a phone consult with me. It is hard to understand some of the cases here just on a message, but I hope I have explained some of what's going on with them. If you want to get on a phone call, we can do that as well and dive a little bit deeper into that and try to give you more answers. I hope you understand your kiddo better and understand that. And again, the big takeaway for this, if you're still watching this, is just understanding that a lot of times their actions, their behaviors, things that they're doing are not in their control. Emotional outbursts, behaviors, whatever it may be, are not in their control. And so they don't understand the consequences of their actions a lot of times. They don't understand that A plus B equals C, right? That's a higher executive function up here, right? They don't understand that behavioral things, the way they interact with individuals, has consequences. Ultimately, too, the autonomic nervous system, specifically the parasympathetic or the vagus nerve, they believe is intimately involved with reading faces and interpreting those faces. So if you have a system that is dysfunctional, they can't read. We're not talking the same language. They don't understand that in real life, quick context, right? Like, and they don't pick up on tone inflection and visual facial expressions because that nerve is not functioning well. That book is called The Polyvagal Theory. He goes in depth about that. It's a really good book, very in depth though. It's like a textbook almost. So I don't know that you'll ultimately want to read it. If you want to, go ahead, go nerd out on it. I enjoyed it immensely, but he basically states that nerve is kind of the premise behind our social interactions. It's what causes us to fight, flight, freeze, and also what allows us to interpret what's going on. Is my inflection friendly or not friendly? And so you can imagine these kiddos, they're seeing facial expressions, they're hearing inflections in voice, but they can't quite pick up on, is this a joke or is this not a joke? And so sometimes you'll see these kiddos and they'll take it too far, right? Like they think they're playing and their friend is saying stop, right? But they don't understand, like they can't pick up on the early cues of stopping, right? And so it goes too far and then, it hurts a friendship or whatever. So that's an important thing. Everyone talks about limiting screen time, but my kids agree with that. Okay, yeah. So look, screen time. That great question. Screen time. You have to kind of navigate that. Okay. Screen time can be good, or not good, but it can be okay. There can be no issues with it. The problem is if they're seeking the screen time as a form of deflection. And what I mean by that is a form of distracting. So the difference between, like, say, reading and watching something, okay, there's two different ways of processing information. When you read something, your brain has to interpret what those images mean, has to put them into a context, and then has to essentially kind of create something for you. It's a massive thing to do that. and it's an important thing to do, right? Like when you read a text. Okay, so for kiddos who have visual problems and visual interpretation problems, when they read a list of like how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, because their sensory system, their visual ocular motor system is not integrated, and they have trouble visualizing the end product, they cannot make it. That's why it's tough for them to go down a list. They can't understand how this is all coming together. They cannot predict the future of what's happening, and thus it's very difficult. The problem with screen time is twofold. If it's used as a form of deflection, so when you don't have to predict and read and interpret it, when it's all there, that's what a screen does. It gives you everything. It takes the burden off of interpreting things, right? Like when I read a red firehouse, I can envision a red firehouse, but it's just there. I don't have to, I don't have to imagine it or use it. That can be a crux for kids if that's how they use it. So they use it as a form of deflection. Secondly, with school, it's not as detrimental, or is not as impactful. But like with video games and other things, there's immediate rewards happening, right? They achieve something and they're rewarded, so they get dopamine dumps. Feels good. That's why they get addicted to it in a sense, is because they can achieve things very, very quickly. So parents will be like, well, my kid can't pay attention in school, but he can play video games for 9 straight hours. Why? Well, in school, you're learning something and then you're having to apply it, and then you have to do it, and then finally you get the reward. But that inherently could take hours, right? You're not going to get it instantaneous. But with video games and other things like this, with games, it's an instantaneous turnaround, right? So they can get a dopamine release. Rarely, they get the reward really, really quickly, and thus that's why they love it. All right, any other questions? Excuse me. All right. Hey, thank you for all the questions. Again, I'm not going anywhere, so please don't think that I'm not going to be here answering questions or doing things or trying to help you. Look, I want to answer more questions for you. I have more time and want to benefit you as much as I can. So it makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. Look forward to it. Okay, awesome. Hey, do me a favor. If you're still on, I'll actually ask this. What do you want to know more about? I can jump on a live later. It may not be structured like this, but I can jump on and deep dive into some stuff like this. Look, because I understand sometimes you need to hear this kind of a couple times to fully let this sink in, right? And so, or just to kind of fully gather the information and get a better understanding. So, look, I repeat topics all the time, and I just go deeper into a topic than I maybe did right now. So, any other questions? Thank you for those who did questions. All right, if anything comes up afterwards, I'll jump on and answer them. I'll either comment or I'll jump on another video. But thank you so much for being in here. I'm not going anywhere again, so please ask questions. Let me know how I can help. If you have a direct question that you don't want to ask to the group, you can just DM me directly, and happy to answer that. All right, thank you so much. Stay safe, everybody, and let me know how I can help you.